Hey, welcome back, everyone, to yet another episode of Apostates Anonymous. I am one of your hosts, Matthew J. DiStefano, the author of The Wisdom of Hobbits and the forthcoming Mimetic Theory and Middle Earth. That's going to be out March 14th on the anniversary of the last book, so I'm excited about that. And I'm joined by Keith Giles, my partner in crime. Say hi to the people.
Hello, everyone. It's Keith, you're the other host, and happy to be here.
The other guy.
That other guy, the other white bread, white meat, whatever, the other white meat.
Whitest bread. No. The Wonder Bread.
Yeah. So yeah. If you don't know already, I'm an author. I've written the Jesus On series. Check them out on Amazon. I have another podcast called Second Cup with Keith, and there's a book that goes right along with it. Second Cup with Keith, the book. Check that out. Speaking of books related to podcast, Matt and I do another podcast together called Heretic Happy Hour, and there's a book for that podcast that just came out. Features interviews with some amazing people like Rainn Wilson, Bishop Carlton Pearson, John Fugelsang, some amazing people. So yeah, go check that out.
But wait, there's more.
There's more.
That's what it felt like. How are you today? What's new in your neck of the woods?
Well, what is new? I finally yesterday reached a point where I cleared off my desk enough to actually have time to go and work on some personal things. So I'm trying to get back into proofing the Gospel of Thomas, to get that ready to send over to you so we can get that thing ready to publish. And this kind of ties into what our topic is going to be today. I'm also finished up doing edits for a new book project that we're doing with choir called Who is Jesus to You? And that book is going to be pretty sweet. There's some amazing contributors to that book.
¿Quién es Jesús para ti? I have a contribution in there, so it's worth the price of admission alone.
I put yours at the very end because I thought yours was a great way to end it.
Did you put it at the very end?
I did. I'm serious. I thought it was a great way to wrap it up. It was I think it was. Don't you think? Don't you think yours is sort of a final? After I've read everybody else's perspectives, I think your perspective gives this don't give it away, but it's a great.
I won't. But
ending.
Do I worry that perhaps I might leave a bad taste in someone's mouth? That's what she said. It's a little bit harsh, isn't it? I'm a little. No. It's like finishing your night with a whiskey. It's good for some people, but some people might want to not end that way.
If you want to go back in and soften the blow a little bit, you can do that.
Oh, I don't. I just maybe thought you might put me as the penultimate essay, but
okay.
Hey, I'll clean it up for folks. Who do you can you give away who you're leading off the book with?
Well, Katie Valentine writes the preface.
Because it's her question from Heretic Happy Hour, essentially.
Yes, I think the very first one is Matthew Corman, who wrote "Saying No to God." He's a scholar, Harvard dude, doctorate.
Yale.
He's got a doctorate.
Whoa,
is it
Yale?
Yale,
Jesus
Harvard.
Christ.
What
you
the
just
hell?
You just woo! They take that seriously over there.
They're the same thing. It's the same thing
in the northeast part of the country.
Sorry, Matthew Corman. Anyway, yes. Well, he's a smart guy, and then there's a great mix of people. I'm not going to remember all of them. I will say, choir author Matt Downey, hers blew me away. I loved her chapter. But Greg Boyd is in this. Brandon Robertson is in this. Nora Sophia, Leslie Nees. She's also a choir author. We're going to be publishing her book coming up soon, but she was on Survivor China. Something like that.
China. Survivor China.
So her chapter's great. I mean, there's so many great people. Angie Von Slaughter's in there. Melissa Denise, who does the Love Covered Life podcast, is in there. It's a nice cross section. And our friend Safi Kaskas has a chapter in there as well. Who's a Muslim, but a Muslim who loves Jesus. So it's good. It's all essays about who is Jesus to you now, and it's really great.
Now that you're on your way to hell, who does Jesus mean to you?
Well, I mean, so this is the thing. There's a quite a spectrum, right? I mean, I would say there's a few contributors like Greg Boyd, who is probably going to be more I hate to say, I mean, he's still a progressive Christian, but So he's coming out
I
from.
would not call Greg progressive at all.
Okay, well,
But see, that's to prove your
compared
point
to
on
my
how.
Southern Baptist upbringing, he's progressive.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. But that
but
proves your point to how diverse the people are, because I'm in there and I'm like, yo, he's not progressive.
so really, we've got basically um, pastors all the way to post-Christian, New
Yeah.
Age. Who is Jesus to you? He's second person of the Trinity, all the way to he's an ascended master who is telling us about our own divinity
All the
and
way to
everything in
Matt's
between.
chapter,
Yeah, yeah.
which is out in left field a little bit. But we have a topic today which probably relates, but
Yeah, a little bit.
perhaps doesn't relate to the ad that comes before the topic, which is sometimes the case, where sometimes you get a sponsor and you just take it because you really believe in what they do.
Well, because the sponsors don't really know what our editorial calendar is supposed to be, right? What we're going to be talking about, and
Right.
you know why they don't know that? Because you and I don't know
Because
that
we don't know,
until
folks.
right before we hit record. We don't know what we're
And
talking about.
if you
So
can't tell, that's on you.
that's
So
right.
let's hear a word from our sponsor. Today's cities are in ruins. Crime is rampant, corruption is an all-time high, and the swamp is as full as ever. With police budgets gutted, people have nowhere left to turn. That's where Shekinah Glory Holes steps in. At Shekinah Glory Holes, our number one priority is this: to come together around a man offering our love-soaked prayers up to the Almighty, and in doing so he provides his hedge of protection over all of us, spreading his seeds of glory wherever he walks. Currently, we have Shekinah Glory Holes all over the continental United States, but finding them can be quite difficult, as this country doesn't want you to feel the pleasure that comes with the clasped hands of your fellow man. So find us on Telegram, and take comfort in the fact that all your glory hole visits will be our little secret. We'll see you soon, and we can't wait for you to taste the glory.
I'm kind of disturbed. I'm not exactly sure what that ad was for.
It's a prayer group. They
Oh,
pray for you.
oh,
Underground prayer group.
okay. I was
And a
picturing
part of
other
the ad,
things.
well, that's not that. I mean, when I spoke with them about
Uh,
this advertisement,
mhm.
they wanted to make sure that they kept it a little underground, because they're worried about the current
Sure,
culture
that's
and
right.
that Christians are attacked in this country.
All the
And
time,
so they have their prayer groups in these hole in the walls
of
type
course.
places. Like, think of a small restaurant, but it's a prayer group.
Or like a
So
strip
it's,
mall, maybe a strip mall with like a
yeah, just a
laundromat
tiny
and a
place, not
yeah,
marked, because
yeah, unmarked.
they want to, they took prayers out of school, so they're going to the strip
That's
malls
right.
into their
Yeah,
Shekinah glory holes.
Shekinah glory holes. Yeah, there's probably like
Hmm.
a password.
And that's why you find them on Telegram. That, it's all encrypted and the government can't track you.
Okay, wow. You know what? We find the most interesting sponsors. I got to say, we have the most unique sponsors on this
Hmm.
show. And thank you all.
Mostly from the dark web.
Yes, from the dark web or the backwoods of somewhere in Mississippi.
Frog Jump, Mississippi.
Yeah,
I know we got some listeners in Frog Jump.
yeah. Well, actually, there's a Frog Jump, Tennessee. My mom was born there, actually.
Oh, well, whatever this fucking
Yeah,
state is, they're all the same over there.
yeah.
Sorry to piss off some of
All
our
of our friends,
listeners, I'm
all of
sure.
our lovely listeners in the South, we apologize. We love
I
you.
have a lot of friends in the South, a lot of friends in Nashville.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have
So,
family in Nashville, actually. So
hey, you can make fun of us in California. It's fair game. Hey,
yeah, yeah.
man.
Well,
Hey, man.
I'm in Texas now, so
Yeah,
it's
there you
kind
go.
of bad. There's speaking of this, there's also, if you've seen her on Instagram, I'll give her a shout out. This is just a free plug. I can't remember her name, but if you search it, I'm sure you can find it. There's this comedian on Instagram, and she's like a recovering Californian, but she lives in Tennessee. That's her whole shtick. She
Okay.
goes, "Hi, I'm Carolyn something, and I'm a recovering Californian," and then she'll like do these little video clips. They're really funny. She's really cool.
Cool, man.
So
Sweet plug when you can't even remember her name.
yes, I think it is Carolyn. It's coming to me. I think it's Carolyn something. But anyway,
Hmm.
it's funny.
Let's
Go look
hope
it up.
your marketing chops are a little better than that,
Google it.
buddy boy.
Google it.
Yeah.
You'll find her.
You ever tell someone to Google something?
Google it.
Just offhand. Man, you got Google. What are you talking about?
Yeah, just Google it.
All right, what's our topic today?
Well, I think our topic is I don't know. I guess I was just thinking about. I think we're going to call this something like being human as God is human. But I think what we're going to actually end up talking about is more like the humanity of Jesus. Again, this goes to the whole like who is Jesus to you, and I think when I was an evangelical Christian, and especially when I was in college and doing apologetics, the whole thing was Jesus is God, right? And people would ask, "Do you believe that Jesus is God?" Right? And we're so emphasizing this thing. We got to talk about that. You have to believe and have faith that Jesus was God, and so the divinity of Jesus is kind of always the emphasis. And I guess on this conversation, on this episode, I wanted to talk about let's emphasize the humanity of Jesus. If you believe that Jesus was God, then then what we're saying is that God was human. And why was God human? In what ways was God human? And what is the significance that God was human? So there you go.
Yeah. I take God out of the equation. Like, I mean, as mimetic beings, if you have a God or not God, however you label it, like it's who you follow, and whether it's a God or not. You're right that we have to. I think a better approach is to view the humanity of something and recognize that rather than Jesus be this kind of ethereal second person of the Trinity, whatever the hell that means, right? Like
Yeah.
once you start using God language, it gets really nebulous sometimes.
Hmm.
You just say, is Jesus as a person worth following? And that's a more important question because it's practical.
Yes.
Because if there are things worth following, we have to hopefully, well, I believe that the moral arc of the universe heads towards justice, peace,
Yes.
restoration, all those good things that Paul talks about, other people talk about.
Right.
So that is the only question that's important to me these days, because the minute you mention God is the minute I have to pause you and say, okay, well, let's realize that everything we now say is theology. It's
Right.
not necessary. So it's kind of it's pointless in one regard.
Yeah.
It's important in one regard, but it's also pointless in another.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting too is depending on what you're talking about, it has a different emphasis, right? So if when the emphasis is on Jesus is God, if that's like your whole emphasis, and again, when I was an evangelical, that was one of the big deals, right? Um, it seems that the Jesus is God emphasis is more about authority, right? So you better shut up and listen and do what Jesus says and watch out because he's going to get you, kind of a thing. It's sort of a power down, power over kind of a conversation, right? And that's why I think evangelicals are so wrapped up into that, because then Jesus becomes, well, you need to worship Jesus. You need to, obey. It's all about obedience and worship, right? And authority. But when you flip that around and you say, okay, but let's say that that God was human, that's a completely different conversation. Now it's not about power over; it's about power under. It's about humility. I guess one of the other things that kind of sparked this too was I just did a response video with Tim Whitaker on this guy that wrote a book about against universal reconciliation. It was horrible, horrible book. But in his interview that we were responding to, he went off on this tangent and had this big thing about um, how Christians, progressive, quote unquote, progressive Christians who embrace universal reconciliation, that one of the problems with them was they tended to see God, like they would say things like, these are his words, that God diminished himself when he created the universe or everything. When in creation, God diminished himself, and he thought that was horrible. Like, no, God doesn't. God is great. God is powerful. Like again, he wanted God to be up there, over powerful, and everything. And I'm like, that is such an odd way to phrase it. Like, what is your problem with God humbling? God, isn't that the whole point of Philippians 2, right? That Jesus didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but let go of that, emptied himself, humbled himself, took on the form of became human, took on flesh, took on the form of a servant. And so, what we see in Philippians 2 is God in the form of Jesus in this metaphor, going down, 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 not even just a human level, but then underneath humans to be a servant to us. And then that is presented to us in Philippians 2 as, and you should do the same. So because God did that, you should do that. You should also be one who is meek and humble and who serves other people, right? In this same way. And it's just funny to me, like those different emphasis on who Jesus is and how it will impact the way you live. Are you living then from a place of authority? I'm right, you're wrong, shut up. Jesus is God. Don't question it. Just bend the knee and bow the head. Or is it, no, God became human, therefore, okay, then what does it mean to be a human being that's like God? Then I'm humble, I'm a servant, I'm loving other people, I'm caring for other people. And I kind of feel like those are your choices. Like you, at least within Christianity, you're going to pick one or the other, and it's radically going to impact the way you behave, the way you think, and the way you treat other people.
Yeah, first off, great thoughts. It's really weird to think of someone, a human being, like needing worship or even getting worship.
Yes.
Like I just imagine Jesus, the person, like I guess just standing on stage while the worship team comes up and plays and they sing songs at him. Like he's
Yes.
not even participating. They're just singing at him like he's the king or the emperor.
Yeah.
And then he gives thumbs up or thumbs down,
Yeah. Yeah.
like from Gladiator. Um and then like the Luther talked about all this. He talked about the kind of the God from below or the God from
Yeah.
above, and what is the point? What is the point of a God who is just like all the other gods? First of all, that's how
Right.
all the other gods. But really, like if we're gonna say that God is all knowing, which that's a whole discussion in and of itself. Don't we have to say that to know something is to experience it?
Mm-hmm.
So doesn't God have to experience humility and meekness and servitude in order to say God knows those things?
Right.
Just like we have to say I can ride it. If I know how to ride a bike, I have to be able to ride the bike.
It doesn't mean you
I,
watched a YouTube video on bike
right.
riding.
Oh, okay. I understand the physics of it.
You
Cool.
understand how to ride a bike, sure, but you've never actually
Yeah,
sat on one.
I even made the bike. I even created the bike and I created the person who does the bike.
Yeah.
But can I say I know how to ride the bike if I don't myself sit on the bike and get on there? So if we're going to say that God knows all these things, then it kind of has to be, sorry to be orthodox for a second, it kind of has to be incarnational and then
Mm-hmm.
experienced.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so the answer to that kind of is a person who is born into poverty to experience poverty. God knows what poverty is, to experience
Yes.
suffering, to
Yes.
experience physical and bodily and spiritual suffering and anguish and confusion and sin
Hunger and fatigue
and
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 anger.
repentance.
Yes. And
And then we start
learning.
talking
Learning.
and
Yeah.
learning, yeah, learning and growth and fucking it up and doing it right the next time,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
changing his mind.
Yes.
So then
This is
we
exactly what I'm
talk
talking
about a
about.
God who's a lot different. When we start human and
Mm-hmm.
go to God, then we have a different God than if we start God and go to human.
Mm-hmm.
And most people go God, all powerful,
Yes.
almighty, all
He knows
world
everything. He
beating,
can do
knows
anything. Yes.
everything.
Yeah.
Oh, so he knows the experience of repentance. Because the Christian God doesn't in most
Right.
people's framework.
Yeah.
He doesn't know the experience of repentance. I would say I would much rather have a God who has had to repent, like maybe Jesus calling a woman a dog. Yo,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus. Nah.
Yeah.
And so the Jesus of today would have repented.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping.
Well, even in that story, it seems that he does because he learns from her. He changes. She changes his mind. Right. She
If Jesus
convinces him,
didn't
and he
die on a
says,
cross,
"Go."
would he grow? Would he continue to grow? Would he continue
Of
to have
course.
those experiences? Of course, right? So
Yeah.
give me the God who repents and changes God's mind which Matthew Cortman would
That's
argue.
right. A great book on that. Yeah.
Right.
No, this is exactly what I wanted to talk about because again, these are the things that I got to say. When I was an evangelical Christian, were very uncomfortable to talk about or even think about, And I remember sitting around, like in college with some friends of mine, and someone might start saying things like that. Well, it says in the Gospels, I don't know, I think it's Matthew or something, that that Jesus grew, in understanding and
Mhm.
stuff, and in obedience to his parents, and then like, okay, so how does God, if we're going to say, okay, Jesus was God, you know, um, grew and learned and was obedient to his parents. Like, I remember always thinking, like, at what point in that evangelical framework, like that view of God and Jesus, at what point did Jesus kind of just wake up and go, "Oh, I'm God," like
Oh my!
I
Oh,
created the
oh
universe.
my me!
Oh my me. And see, but I think this is what I wanted to talk about. This is exactly what the kind of thing I want to talk about. Like, if you start emphasizing and really, like you said, start with human. Like, I had a conversation with Kenneth Tanner, Father Kenneth Tanner, great guy, and he was sparking my imagination on some of this. He was saying that,
What is an Orthodox doing talking to a heretic like you?
yeah, well, I don't think he knew I was a heretic at the time.
Oh, okay.
He might know now, but at the time we were talking, and he was saying that, I didn't know this, that a lot of early Christians had this view of the incarnation. It's really interesting. Their view of the incarnation was that God didn't become fully incarnate as a human, and this is to your point, until he died. So until the moment of death on the cross,
Oh,
Jesus,
okay.
God didn't fully incarnate, because until a human being dies,
Because God
you
hadn't
haven't
experienced death.
you haven't had the human experience from beginning to end. If again, so like we as humans, right? We've experienced birth, we've experienced, being an infant, learning to walk, being a toddler, going through puberty, whatever, all these different, milestones in the human experience. But until we die, we haven't completed the human experience. And in that sense, God in the incarnation in Christ, in Jesus, in the life of Jesus, wasn't complete until his death. And I'm like, oh, wow. So God wasn't fully human until right at the end,
Okay,
right at
but
the
okay,
moment of death.
to push back on that. Okay, so you're saying no one before Jesus who lived and died was incarnated with God? So
Well,
God had. I would say God has experienced death every time anything is lived and died.
yeah, but I would say it's not a moment in time. It's a process, right? So in other words, it's always becoming, it's always being, it's always, so the incarnation is
Right.
incarnationing, right? The
Yeah.
incarnation began at birth, and they continued all the way up until the death, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's very fascinating to me to think of it in that sense. Um,
So
and
currently, God is continuing to incarnate.
I
God
would,
is
yes,
present tense incarnating in all. Yeah, and
yes,
has always been incarnating.
has always been. So now, two things there, right? So in both
Maybe.
directions. So again, this is breaking away from sort of the evangelical Christian mindset, right? Because in the evangelical Christian mindset, this incarnation that Kenneth Tanner's talking about, this is where I would disagree with Kenneth Tanner probably. Um, that incarnation event, miracle, whatever it is only about Jesus, right? It's only about Jesus. Whereas I would say the incarnation, God incarnating in humanity, in human consciousness, has been going on long before Jesus and is still going on now. That again, this is the process of incarnation has been ongoing. Now, Richard Rohr would agree with that, but interestingly enough, some pretty major church fathers like Athanasius also affirm this idea that the Christ, or that God, was incarnate in all of creation, right? Even before Jesus. So that's not even, it's not, I would say that's not even a heretical view, and it's not a new idea. It's actually something that Christians, all the way back to Athanasius at least, have been pondering and considering, this ongoing incarnation process.
So you'd put it like this: you have heard it said that Jesus is the only incarnate of God. But I say unto you, as Keith Giles in 2024,
Yeah,
God's always been incarnating and will always continue to be incarnating.
that's right. That's right.
I can dig it.
Selah. Yeah. And then they picked up stones.
I mean,
No,
but why Jesus? Then there's got to be something that, because I don't believe in the conspiracy and the hoax. That's why they got so many followers and all that shit.
what do
You
you
know,
mean? The
Rome
conspiracy?
made him up to pacify the
Oh,
people.
no, no, no. No, I'm not saying
So
that at all.
then,
No, I'm not
no,
saying
no, no,
they made
no,
up
no. That's what
Jesus.
I'm saying. So then, what's the mechanism that gets? Then why do so many people like start following Jesus, and why today do we even revere him? Did God really raise him from the dead? Then
Okay, that's a great one. Let's start with the first question because that's at least two questions in there. So why did Jesus sort of get popular? Right? How did we get to this point? Right?
it is more of a historical question, and then it's also more of a theological question.
Sure.
Then okay, so if it's always been incarnated and always will be incarnating, Jesus would be no different than the rest of us. Then why do we care about Jesus? I mean, we can say, oh, we don't any more than Gandhi, but we do because we talk about Jesus a lot more than we talk about Gandhi.
Right. So let's
So
but let's talk
yeah.
about that. So I have a theory. Of course, I would have to do massive amounts of research to prove it,
Oh
but
boy.
this is my theory. I think here we go. Put on the heresy button here. I think
Aliens? No,
yeah,
I'm just
no,
kidding.
no, 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 no. No, I think Jesus was a human being. I think Jesus did sort of have an epiphany, had some uh, realization of the sort of the Christ consciousness. Of course, I don't think he would have called it that, but I think some of the things that Jesus says about, in that day you will know that I'm in the Father and that you are in me and I am in you, like this sort of interconnectedness between the divine and the human. So, in other words, I think Jesus was a very charismatic person. I think he said things that got people excited and amazed them, and like the parables that he told, the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. I think the core of who Jesus was and the message that he gave was very simple. It was something that was a threat to the power structures of the day, the Roman government, and to the religious authorities of the day. And I do think that's the reason why he ultimately ended up getting crucified. Again, the same way Socrates or Gandhi or Martin Luther King and others who have had similar messages have also ended up getting, killed. This is all mimetic theory stuff.
Right, yeah.
So
I'm
I
tracking
think,
with you.
all right, so I think this is why Jesus, let's say contemporary to Jesus, first century, that's why there was all this swirl around him of, man, this Jesus guy, have you heard him talk? You know what he's talking about? You know what he's doing? Oh my gosh, this is radical. This is revolutionary. This is exciting. And then he's crucified. And then it's sort of
Yeah.
like a scramble to like, okay, what the hell just happened? Right? Let's make some sense of this, right? I agree with like Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan and some others that there was, again, because I do believe in God, I'm a deist, right? I do believe in the Christ consciousness. So I think that after the crucifixion of Jesus, I think this is how I would frame it. I think those disciples did have sort of a spiritual experience that they communicated was they had encountered the resurrected Jesus or the resurrected Christ. I don't think it was physical. I don't think Jesus' body came out of the grave. I think they continue to have revelation, if you want to say from God or from the Christ consciousness or whatever, that convinced them that the ideas, the spirit, if you will, of Jesus was still alive and was still in motion, and that they could be a part of that forward motion, the continuing motion of, in other words, as we were just saying, hey, that Jesus was the incarnation of Christ, but so are we. By the way, that's all through Paul's writings. He says that all the time. And let's remind everybody, Paul's writings came long before the Gospels were even written. So, Paul is the first sort of Christian person writing about Christ, and he's writing things like Christ fills everything in every way, and we are all filled with the fullness of God, and this idea that we are now the body of Christ, right? Jesus was the incarnation. Richard Rohr explains it this way. Then the bread is held up, and Jesus holds up the bread and says, "This is my body." So now the body of Christ is this bread symbolically. And then Paul is saying that we are partakers of Christ, that we are the hands and the feet of Christ. We are now the body of Christ. And in that sense, that spiritual encounters with Christ, post resurrection or post crucifixion, along with these ideas that the Spirit of Christ now is in us, in all of us. I think that's why sort of the movement of Jesus continued. However, let me put another asterisk. Again, part of my theory. I think the reason why we're still talking about Jesus today is also because, I do think, Christendom, Constantine, right, ended up elevating it, giving power to it, giving authority structures to Christianity so that it endures today as what we experience today. I think it would be an interesting debate as to whether or not that would be the case if Constantine had picked some other religion like Mithraism or something else.
Well, from what I understand, Constantine didn't pick Christianity. He just allowed it to be legal, and then after Constantine, it was adopted as the official religion.
Yeah,
So
but
I think
don't
it
you
was
think?
the. I
Yeah,
think
but
it was
don't you
the. I
think?
would think it was the emperor after Constantine. I can't remember his name.
Yeah. But what? Okay, what's his name? Eusebius. I feel like. I mean, okay. Look, I know this. I don't want this to sound like too conspiratorial, but I read a secular book about Constantine. It's called Constantine the Great. I think it's Michael Grant is the author. So totally secular book, just about the life of Constantine, right? And I'm reading this book, and it seems in that book that like it really feels like he and Eusebius was a Christian bishop, and Eusebius, what I think was sort of like his um, how would I say it? Like he's the one that was telling Constantine basically, say it this way, use this language. In other words, like here's the best way to sort of co-opt the other Christian bishops to buy into your political power. Um, and so I think Constantine had help from Eusebius, an insider, um, to intentionally, like for example, the story of Constantine's quote unquote conversion experience on the bridge of whatever
Hmm.
Malvern or whatever it was. Um, the story changed. The first time he tells it, it doesn't have all these elements. He doesn't say he saw the symbol of Jesus overhead. That a voice spoke to him. But those parts of his story, that end up later on, show up after he speaks to Eusebius, and it sounds like Eusebius says, "Hey, make your story sound like the story that Paul tells. When Paul is on the road to Damascus, you saw a bright light. You heard a voice from heaven. You saw something." And so his story gets edited creatively, I think, with help from Eusebius, to make his story sound more legit. And so I think there wasn't. I guess my whole point is there was an intentionality to, hey, let's take Christianity, let's find a way to, incorporate it into whatever
Oh, I'm
Constantine
not.
wanted to do.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not opposed. I mean, fuck, that shit happens today, where
Of course,
you kind of soften the language of something. You do this and that to get it more politically palatable.
yeah,
But it's only a step in the direction towards your ultimate goal.
right.
Um, uh, uh, so I'm not. I think my point was just. Oh, I don't even remember my point exactly at this point. But I think the point is that it started. Christianity started as a serious. What you're saying, if correct me if I'm wrong, is like it's like God did something
Sure.
spiritually, if you want to say it that way. Whether bodily or spiritually, maybe we have
Hmm.
a discussion about that
Sure.
and the arguments and counter arguments. If it's important, some people say it is. I don't think about it.
Sure.
Honestly, I do think it would be kind of cool if we had like regular bodies, like in some sort of like.
I have a regular body. What do you mean? What's wrong with your body?
Well, I mean, from what you're saying, it sounds like that Jesus ain't coming back with a body. There's not a bodily
Oh
resurrection.
no, I would say no. Yeah, I
So,
wrote a book on that. Jesus Unexpected. Yeah, my whole thing is that we are the second coming of Christ. We are the
and
body
I
of
think that
Christ.
yeah, that's true. But can two things be true at the same time? Right? Like maybe.
I don't think so, personally. No, because
Okay.
the reason why I don't buy into that is that I think the idea
I'm
that
not saying
the
I'm not saying I'm an
specific,
apologist for a bodily
sure,
resurrection, but yeah.
because I would be shocked if that's what you were saying. Um, But yeah, I mean, to me, again, people really don't like this idea because I know I've talked to so many Christians that are just like, no, but I need to see Jesus face to face. I need to I need specifically Jesus, you know. And I'm like, and they need it to be real, like physical, and he needs to physically show up in the sky in a cloud, and there needs to be a trumpet, and he needs to be riding a white pony with a sword coming out of his mouth. Like they need to actually experience that exact real thing. And I'm like, okay, but what if instead you die, and we're all going to die, and when you die, you are in the presence of pure love. You're in the presence of God in Christ. You have an experience that you could never have in your physical body. It's just because that veil is removed. You are pure spirit to pure spirit, pure consciousness to pure consciousness. Again, face to face, if you want to say it that way. And you are experiencing the pure, concentrated fullness of the love of Christ. That's not enough for you. You need him to like have a beard and be wearing a robe and be fit, like physically shake his hand before that's satisfying to you somehow. Like, I mean, I guess on one level, I guess it's because we have that expectation we were given that is what's going to happen. I'm saying it's going to be 100,000 times better than that. And I'm not saying you're not going to have some experience with Christ. I mean, of course you are, because you're going to return to the source of all things in the universe, right? Um, so I don't know. I personally just don't think there's going to
I
be
think
a
I think
physical
some of
return of
us
Jesus.
I think some of us are going to die and we're going to come face to face with Jesus, and it's going to be a prostitute in the street,
Yeah.
and you're still going to have to and you're going to finally realize,
Like, oh shit.
or it's going to be the people you hate. It's going to be a
It'll be an
Muslim.
immigrant.
If
It'll
you
be an
hate him, it's going to
immigrant.
be an immigrant.
Yeah. Or a
It's going to be
Muslim
someone. It's going to
or
be
a
someone with
gay
cerebral
person.
palsy. It's going to be a gay
Yeah.
person. Be a trans
Yeah.
person. It's going to be
Yes.
all
Trans
the
person.
people.
Whatever would
And
offend you
mm,
and scandalize you.
and it's
Yes.
just
I think I
Jesus
totally
everywhere.
agree.
And
That's the face you're going to see.
you're gonna be walking through just streets of them.
Yep.
That's your hell until you figure it out. And
Like, oh, this was Christ all along.
this was
Yeah.
Christ.
Yeah.
We never
And so,
talk about me coming face to face with Jesus and talk about, oh, Jesus is still gonna be the widow and the
yeah,
beggar and
that's right.
the leper, or the
Yeah. The
I
one
guess
who's
not
hungry
leper
and thirsty and in prison. And
today,
yeah,
but
what
yeah.
did you do with them? Yeah, exactly. Like this is, I think that's exactly what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 25. Like, you know, like here, again, I'm in Texas, and the governor is putting up razor wire and says he would, if he could get away with it, he would put up snipers and he would assassinate immigrants trying to cross, over into Texas. And it's like, okay, understand what you're saying is, I would put up razor wire to drown Jesus and his family in
Hmm.
the Rio Grande. I
That's
would
not
I
what
would
you're twisting
assassinate
my
Jesus.
words. You're twisting my
No,
words.
I'm not, but I'm quoting Jesus' words, right? Jesus is saying,
I
"Whatever
know
you've done for the least of these, you did it to me." And
exactly.
so that's the reality. And this is why I think the humanity of Jesus is so important. Not just Jesus, the humanity of God. That to see God in everyone, in one another, is such a critical thing for us as humanity. I think it's the thing. Again, for me, I think it's the one thing that we need to get. Again, I think Jesus emphasizes this all the time, as we just said in Matthew 25. When you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. Um, that there is this connection between the divine and the human, and if we fail to recognize that, for as long as we fail to see that, we are going to continually be um, sort of doomed to live in a world where there is this kind of suffering that's going on all around us. Because you can only create suffering in another human being if you fail to see yourself, or you fail to see God in that other person.
I told Christians for years now in print. I'll say it again. I don't care. If you want hell, you can have it. I don't believe in hell. I
No.
mean, I believe in hell as long as we derrida the situation and
Yeah.
define what we're talking about.
Yes.
However, in the evangelical model of hell, I don't believe that. But if it's true, I don't have anything to worry about, because I'm not a talking about Jesus all the time follower and then not doing the things he said to do.
Right.
I might not do the things he said to do because, like, we all fuck up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the point of that parable is that it's the people who, I think that this is how I interpret it today. It's the people who go to church every Sunday and every Wednesday for Bible study and blah, 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 blah. Or they take photo ops of them reading their Bible in front of all their crosses and post it on their Twitter. And then they hate every single person that Jesus is,
Yes.
that Jesus says he is, the
Hmm.
widow, the immigrant, all the
Yeah.
people that those folks hate.
Yeah.
Um, I hate to break it to you, but you're the ones who go to hell.
According
Like
to it, yeah.
read the story.
Yeah.
Read Mark 9. Everyone passes through the fire.
Yeah.
If you're confident that your shit ain't gonna burn up, then keep at it.
Yeah.
Keep taking your photo ops and look in the mirror and be honest with yourself. And when you read those passages, just make sure you skip over them because they're woke liberal agendas.
Hmm.
But that's not true. Those words are in there, and you believe, or you say you believe, that Jesus said them.
Yeah.
So we all pass through the fire. So,
Yeah.
whatever. I'm a universalist, and I still believe that. I believe there is some sort of justice. I don't know if it's
Hmm.
Christ-centered or pluralistic or whatever, but I have to believe there's some sort of justice in the end. That's why I can't be an atheist, honestly.
Right.
Really, is like Christians or anyone who believes in God has the problem of suffering, but atheists have the problem of justice. This is a cold, Last of Us type of world.
Yes.
Like dark. Most
Yeah.
people die with no justice and their whole life suffering. And
Yes.
I can't get on board with that, just like I can't get on board with a God who could totally prevent suffering.
That's right. Yeah. And so when we
Because
talk about universalism, we're not talking about an ollie ollie oxen free, everybody gets off the
no.
hook. Like I agree with you. Again, that verse in Mark, Jesus says everyone passes through the fire. Paul says that that there's two kinds of people that pass through the fire. Some people pass through the fire and that fire burns away all the bad and reveals all the good, the gold and the silver and the precious stones. But he says there's another group of people and they pass through the fire and it burns everything up. There's nothing left. But
And
he
they
still
only
has.
make it through as if through fire.
That's right.
It's
That's right.
it's the only thing that the love of God and the justice of God, and you want to call it the white hot wrath of God.
Yeah. But it's the
It's
refiner's
it's the
fire.
it's
It's
the
not a
only thing that
destroying
saves you
fire.
at
It's
that
not a
point. You're such
yeah. It's not a fire that tortures. It's not a fire that
no.
destroys. It's a fire that refines and restores and makes all things
It's
new.
the fire that burns. It's the fire that burns in you when you walk through all that street that we're talking about with all the
Yes.
Jesuses, poor and destitute on the side of the street. It's the fire that burns in you that changes you as you walk from one end of the street to the other. And you get to the other side, and you're like, "Fuck, I
Yes.
kind of fucked that one up." So
That's right. Yeah.
let's
And
go
then
figure
at
this
the end of
out.
that, there is massive amounts of repentance and transformation. And I'm so
Shame and
sorry. And
guilt. No, I'm just kidding.
shame and guilt. And then all that needs to be healed and restored. Yes. And so again, that's the justice of God. It's this restorative justice of God. And I think that's why the metaphor of fire is used. Again, let's be real. It's a metaphor. It's not actually fire. No one's like throwing gasoline and sparking a match. It's not real fire, but it's something that will feel uncomfortable. It will feel like, oh, get me out of here. This is not fun. Right. But but the
Like when I did
purpose of
mushrooms.
it, the purpose of it is not just to make you uncomfortable. The purpose is not just to, again, torture or destroy. The purpose of all of that, whatever it is, that quote unquote fire experience, that is the justice of God, is for our good, right? It says in Hebrews, it's so that we can share in the holiness of God. But
And
to get there,
and we
it's
get
a
there,
process.
yeah. And to get there to that theology, you start with the human. And that's
Yes.
where the Christians get it wrong. Like they don't start with the human, they start with God. So then the justice ends up looking like our most baser bullshit instincts. Retribution or something
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah.
Wrath looks like anger and malice and Driscollism, and
Yeah.
it looks like a UFC fighter who's going to kick your head in.
I can't wait to see Jesus. I can't
I can't
wait to see Jesus.
wait to see
He's going to
Jesus.
show up and just kick
I
the shit
can't
out of all
wait
these
to
people
see
that
Jesus.
I hate so much. That's going
Right.
to be the best show ever. Just watching
But then
Jesus show up and smash and destroy and burn and slaughter the trans and the gays and the liberals and the atheists and the people that don't like my podcast. And he's
I'm gonna mute him right now, folks. No one can hear you right now because I muted his mic because I was a little bit sick of that ranting and raving. Are you back? Are you better? You sound like you got demon possessed for a second, Keith.
I was channeling Mark Driscoll.
Oh, you were channeling the
Yeah,
inner
that
Driscoll,
wasn't me. I was
the
channeling
inner
Mark.
the inner alpha male in us all.
My inner Driscoll. Yes.
Thank God for
I
me being the
can't wait to
producer.
see Jesus because he thinks that
Uh,
Jesus is coming back to be that kind of right retributive God. Like that's his whole
yeah.
mindset. And so many Christians, that is exactly their mindset. They can't imagine, a God that would respond in with mercy and humility, with love, with healing, with transformation and restoration. They
Well, it's
can't
simple.
imagine that.
I mean, they have a top down, like we talked
Yes.
about before, they have a top down theology. They start with God,
Hmm.
which is really just their theology, rather than
Yeah.
starting with an empathetic view towards human beings
Yes.
or a loving posture and compassionate posture towards others. And when you start with that, you work your way up to God. Then you go through all the filter of these human experiences that we all can't get away from.
Yeah.
Mark Driscoll and people like that, the John Pipers of the world, they talk about God as if they themselves aren't a human being.
Right.
And so they claim the Bible because they have to have some sort of authority for them to have this information,
Yeah.
not realizing that Bible is interpreting through their grids and filters back through the human again. Um,
Yep.
and we're just flipping it and saying no, we're going to approach everything, including God, and most importantly, probably God, through our human experience first,
Yeah.
so that we end up with a human loving imposture so we can approach gay people and trans people and black people and Hispanic people without an agenda first,
Hmm.
just getting to know them. Like then you don't have to do this whole bullshit of like um starting with an agenda and meeting people in the Christian world, starting with an agenda of trying to save them, and then going from there, and then trying to accept them second. Save them
Hmm.
first, accept them second. Well,
Right. How
we
about just
generally don't get. I would
yeah.
just love them and not only accept them, but like champion them, and like shoot, that's what your differences from my differences are cool now, and I can champion them and like just think that's cool about you, and not without an asterisk, you know.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And see, that's what I think is so interesting about Jesus is that I feel like one of the most amazing things that Jesus does, is he, like in the Sermon on the Mount or in the parables, like especially the prodigal son parable, he does Jesus humanizes God in a way, right? When he tells these parables, like the prodigal son parable, right? Um, Everyone listening to that parable that he was talking to, right? He's surrounded by all these Pharisees because we know, according to the context, because they had asked him some kind of question, right, about like why do you hang out with sinners? So he tells these three parables, right? He tells the parable of the woman that lost a coin. First, it's the parable of the good shepherd that loses the one sheep, leaves the 99, goes to find it. Second, he tells the parable of the widow who loses a coin, cleans her house till she finds it, and then celebrates. And then the third parable is the prodigal son. And so again, he's telling this parable, and when he's telling this story about the prodigal son, they're all waiting for the punchline. The punchline in their minds is, well, hey, we get it now. These parables, like, okay, God is the shepherd, God is the widow, and now God is this father whose son insulted him, goes off and squanders his inheritance. He's, sleeping with prostitutes, he's getting drunk, and now he's even hanging out with the pigs, which is like unclean, massively unclean. And now he's like, oh, I messed up. I'm going to go back to my dad and say, hey, dad, I don't deserve even to be called your son anymore. I'll just be one of your servants because your servants are treated better than I'm living my life right now. And he goes home. And I'm telling you, the people listening to that story, the Pharisees especially, right, the Jewish religious leaders of the day, even just the common people, because of the way they had been taught to think of God, right? They're waiting for the wrath of God,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's the story all the way through. God, we were with God in the garden. We disobeyed God, and we're banished, right? Or we were worshiping God in the promised land, and then we turned to idols, and then we got invaded and turned into slaves and taken into captivity. So this is the pattern, right? We screw up and then we pay the price. So Jesus is telling this prodigal son story. He comes to that part where like the son is heading home, and then all that's gone. It's not there at all. Suddenly God is just a loving father. That's all. God is just a loving father. He runs to his son, he embraces him, puts a ring on his finger, he takes off his robe and puts it around his shoulders. Let's have a party, and just celebrates, right? Like it's such the unexpected. Like what's this story you're telling? This is God, and it's humanizing God in this really beautiful, powerful way. Um, that I really appreciate about Jesus. I feel like that's what he's doing all the way through his Sermon on the Mount, right? Love your enemies, bless those who curse you. Why? Because that's what God does. That's who God is. God is full of mercy and kindness, right? God lets it rain on the just and on the unjust, which contradicts Moses completely, right? Moses says the opposite in Deuteronomy. Um, so I think it's just, I think that's beautiful, and I think that's the direction I would say we should get back to, sort of the humanity of God, and try to
Yeah,
see God
and
from that perspective.
and I love that. I think you just kind of walked into this, like the whole Matthew 5 thing talks about all these ways to be human, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then don't you get to verse 48, which is the last verse in the chapter, and it concludes with, therefore be perfect like God is perfect.
Yes.
And in Luke, the parallel in 6 is I think it's be merciful as God is merciful.
Right.
And so that's the kind of the parallel message there. And so
It's
how
redefining that term. What do you mean the holiness of God?
through how you view
Yes.
humanity,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it's all human. Blessed are the meek, the poor. It's talking about human things, anthropological, sociological things. It's
Yes.
talking about marriage. It's talking about what happens when someone takes your coat. It talks about,
Yeah.
all these, when we're supposed to walk 2 miles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's talking about all these things that human beings do, and it's saying, why do we do that? Then we get to God,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, that's
Ah,
what God's like. God's like God is like this particular way of being human.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. See, again, going back to what we were saying at the beginning, when Jesus, I think, is right there exactly what he's doing in the Sermon on the Mount. Maybe the entire point is to redefine the holiness of God. If your idea of the holiness of God is this power over, right, like the Driscolls and the Pipers and evangelical Christians, then that concept of the holiness of God creates division. It creates separation between God and man, because God is holy and we're not, and God is powerful and we're not. It's all about authority. Obey again, just obey, just worship, just shut up and do what we tell you. That's the way. That's what happens when you define holiness that way. But
Mm-hmm.
if you define holiness, like, again, the way Jesus does in the Sermon on the Mount, it's like, no, the holiness of God is defined by the goodness of God, the kindness of God, right? The mercy of God, the love of God, the compassion of God. That's, Jesus says, be holy like
All the
that.
all the shit Driscoll would call beta,
That's right. That's right. Oh,
and
it's woke.
most Christian men would call it beta.
Yeah. It's wearing the Crocs and the skinny jeans and, being the mamby-pamby worship leader guy, those guys that Driscoll hates. No, but that's what Jesus is. And they hate that too. That's the other thing too. They hate the picture of Jesus as one who is, again, like, so Driscoll doesn't preach about that, right? What does he preach about when he talks about Jesus? He preaches about the guy with the tattoo on his thigh and a sword in his hand. And he's ready to make somebody bleed, right? He says that's the God I can worship, but he can't handle the God who is human, the God who is loving and
Yeah,
kind and merciful and
yeah,
and forgiving.
yeah. That's why I say in my essay in Who is Jesus to You, like, I mean, I'm obsessed with The Last of Us right now because I'm playing through part
Yeah,
2.
it's great. Yeah,
Also, fuck that game because it will
rips your
tear your
heart out.
heart out.
Yes, it
And
does.
my God, and then it will do it again over and over,
Yes.
and it's exhausting. But they want Jesus who's like Joel, or like the characters in like our retributive nature.
Hmm.
And even what that game does, like, spoiler alert, I won't give a spoiler alert, but there's obviously a teaching tool that the world in which our baser instincts of retribution are very fulfilling in the moment, and then they're like a drug that we
Hmm.
never get away from, and in the meantime everything fucking goes by the wayside and falls apart. And look at what happens in so many of these people's lives with this kind of theology that they become mimetic about. They themselves become retributive
Yes,
because they want to be like, if you have a God who's like that, we want to be like God,
that's
right?
right.
Like, we're
Yep.
mimetic. So if your God is a badass, and in the way you think of being badassery, I think
Hmm.
God is a badass. I think Jesus is a badass,
Yeah.
but in a way different definition of that.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
and
because
and I
Jesus.
and
Yeah.
I'm going to follow that if I take it Yeah, if I think it's important enough, I'm going to follow something. We all are.
Yeah, exactly.
So be
Yeah,
careful,
I like that. Jesus is a badass. I think Jesus is a badass in the sense of he's practicing such radical kindness, compassion, love, and forgiveness that most most of us are terrified of that. Like, what? That's why when you read the Sermon on the Mount, you're like, wait, he wants me to do that? What? Because anybody that could do that, like, I can't do that. Like, that just sounds like, what? Because it's not the thing that appeals to that part of us. It's like, I want to be the badass. Yeah, I want to be that. I want
Mhm.
to project that. And so that would be easy. That would be fun. That would be, that's fulfilling something within me. Like, yeah, I want to be that. But when Jesus says, no, be this other stuff, do what I'm doing, loving and forgiving, kindness, all that stuff. It's like, ooh, that's harder than I thought it was. And it's harder than anything I want to even attempt.
Yeah. Well, this has been a good one.
Yeah.
Talk
So
about Jesus a lot on this show. I tell you what.
for a bunch of apostates.
Yeah, I've never talked about Jesus more in my life.
Well, get used to it. I mean, there's probably a lot more Jesus stuff coming up.
So much. We have like Jesus in the title of a lot of our books
Yeah.
accidentally.
Yeah.
We
We
have
were talking
Finding Jesus coming out.
probably by
Actually,
the time this comes out.
came out today. Yeah,
Yeah.
today. Yeah, go pick up Herb Montgomery,
Yeah.
second edition of Finding Jesus.
With a great forward by
And
this guy, Keith Giles. It's really awesome. Go check it out.
he's a guy with a podcast or 3.
Yeah.
And then we have Who is Jesus to You?
Yeah.
We have a book called Inking Christ coming out later.
Great book. Yeah.
We have how many Jesus? We have a lot of Jesus.
We
A
have
lot of Jesus.
a
A
lot of
lot of
Jesus
Jesus
books.
coming.
Compared to last year when we were intentionally sort of like steering away from the Jesus thing all of a sudden, and we didn't plan it. Totally did not plan this, but because a lot of these books people just submitted the books to us, and we're looking at the book and like, hey, that's a fascinating book. Let's publish that book. But as we're laying out the release schedule and looking at all the books we're going to publish, yeah, there's a lot more Jesus books
And we
coming out
bargained for him.
this year.
It's
Yeah,
like
but I think they're great.
Jesus he's like a needy ex-boyfriend. He came he came back into it.
We
Guys,
can't quit you.
I got all these books for you.
Can't quit you,
Please read them.
Jesus. Yeah.
No, Jesus, you're cool. I'll be happy to publish interesting looks at your life, my friend.
Yes.
My friend Jesus, last name Christ. Don't
Jesus
know what the H
H.
stands
Christ,
for.
yeah.
It's
Yeah, so this
Hugo.
was good. This was great. So yeah, thanks everyone
Yeah.
for listening, for hopefully liking and sharing. Tell your friends about us. We'd
And
appreciate that.
find us on social media. We have a choir TikTok. There's a Pathos TikTok. There's all sorts of cool shit.
Yeah, and then of course we're both personally on Instagram and TikTok as well. Yeah,
I don't want you to find me. I'm gonna back it. My goal as the years go on is
Really?
to
You're gonna pull
step
away.
back into the shadows.
Okay.
And well, I'm gonna pull away. I'm just gonna be like Ralph. Like I'm just gonna be
Oh,
choir.
I see. Okay. All
No,
right.
I still want to write. See, I still love writing, and I have
I
a
do
lot of
too.
books to write.
I'm hoping one day soon I might have time to start writing my next book. So
One day soon.
I'm thinking, because I don't know any better, I'm thinking maybe next month. Maybe well we're recording this in February.
You're gonna have a book done by next
No, I'm
month,
gonna start writing the book. I
and
want
it'll
to
be
have
done in
it.
a week.
I mean, I'll have a book coming out. I have a book, The Gospel of Thomas, right? That'll be
Yeah,
out like April, something like that. And then March, April.
April 20th, right? 420.
Yes, something like that. And then
That's something I'd do.
I do have a book of poetry, and that's pretty much done. That
Good.
will be out sometime later this year. So if nothing else, I will put the poetry book out. But I mean, like
What
a
are you
book.
complaining about, Keith? What are you complaining about? You're doing just fine.
I know, but I
Don't
look.
beat yourself up.
I when I think about who I am, I primarily am a writer. I've always loved writing. And when I'm not able to sit down and express myself, because really my way of expressing myself is through writing.
Yourself.
Then it feels like I'm being suffocated. So I have to make room. And I've got a book, like I'm right here next to me. It's been sitting here for months. I've got this. I'm old school here, man. Look at this. This is my next book.
Old man Giles.
Yeah, it's
look at all those post-it notes.
Post-it notes, and it's
post-it notes and a like a 50 ring folder paper thing?
It's
What do you?
a ring binder,
You
and
just rip out.
it's got front and back. It's my outline for my next book
So
with notes.
I have a legal pad.
Is that your next book?
No, it's my
No.
to-do list. I stole
How do
this
you?
from work.
So I'm curious. Right here at the end, how do you when you're writing a book? Do you do an
What's my
outline?
creative what's
Yeah.
my
What's your
creative
process?
process? Yeah, I do an outline. Yeah.
But are you on Google Docs or on Word or?
So I learned on Word, and
Yeah,
I know some people are aggravated by Word, and
I
I
use
am
Word all the
too
time.
sometimes. Um, it's like I want to put a picture here, and Word's like, no, no,
No,
no.
no.
It goes where we say.
Yeah,
Um, but I'm used to Word, so I that's what I use. And
I got to
yeah,
say,
I outline, like, especially my Tolkien books. I outline.
yeah.
Um, Obviously, like the letters that I'm writing for my
Hmm.
one of my Tolkien books, I'm not outlining because I'm just answering letters, and they're
Sure.
all the equivalent of a vignette in
And
film.
you'll arrange them maybe once you get them all written. You can go back and say, okay, I want this one to be first. I want this one in the middle. I want this one at the end. Yeah,
I think
or
I'm going
group
to
them.
arrange them by topic and make like 5 or 6 topics.
Okay, that's cool.
That's going to be my plan. But yeah,
Yeah,
I like to outline things, and then it kind of just flows. I
yeah.
don't use AI for outlining.
No,
I've looked at it,
no,
and it's just like this is
no. It's
garbage.
stupid.
This doesn't help.
No,
So
because I know what I want to say when I'm outlining a book. So like, I actually that's where I got into trouble with when I wrote Solideos, is that I outlined it, but my outline only took me about halfway through it, and I just thought to myself, well, once I get that far into the book, I'll know how to get out of it. I'll know how to land this plane. And that
and
didn't
you
happen.
didn't.
I got halfway through it and I was like, oh God, what am I doing? Um, and that's why that book was so hard to write. It took me a while to figure out, okay, how do I get to the end? So it
Hmm.
worked out. I'm very happy that it did work out. But I promised myself I would never do that again. From now on, I will have the
Yeah.
entire book outlined beginning to end before I start.
But then there's the case, and I know we're up on time, but then there's the case of sometimes you have to change your outline
Oh, I
because you just
do.
realize the
I
order
do.
is not correct or this and that. So
Yeah, no, that happens all the
um,
time. In fact, I would say that almost every book I've ever written, I'll write the outline. Then usually, again, my
yeah.
process. I'll once I've written that first draft, I print it out, and then Wendy will read through it and make notes. And quite often, she'll say, chapter 7 should be chapter 2, or chapter 10 should be chapter
Hmm.
5, or you've got to say
Yeah.
this before you say that, right? So she'll help me, and so that outline gets rearranged quite a bit. In fact, Second Cup with Keith was like a nightmare because like she was like rearranging all this stuff. But it worked out, right? So like, of course, but I need the outline to write the book. If I
Yeah.
to at least sit down and write it, I need the outline to get to the end, and then once it's written, then you can play with it.
Yeah. That's what
So
she
there you go. A
said.
little
All right,
bonus for
folks.
you. A little bonus for you there at the end. Our writing
Yeah.
process.
All right. Rate and review, like the show, tell one friend this week. We love you. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
All
Peace.
right.